Hello, everyone, and welcome to Full Throttle, the Octane talk show. I'm going to be helping host this and bring it along just so the conversation can continue as much as possible. But joining me for tonight is Sloth, Dexy, and instead of Paz, unfortunately couldn't make it because he was sick. We got B Shadow, and hopefully he'll be able to make up for some of that.
I'll try my best.
So, do you guys want to just do a little quick introduction of who you are for those new viewers who might not know? I'm doing a quick one of myself. I'm Vaudable. I'm a community caster for North America, and I'm helping host this show, as I mentioned before. But what about you, Slack? What is some information you can tell the lovely viewers?
So I'm the one who developed Octane.gg. I do all the stats. Stats are good. I love stats. And I don't know. I'm just love me some Rocket League Esports.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
Well, I'm Dexy. I help Slack with Octane GG, help produce this show, and then I do some stuff with the subreddit like CSS and stuff like that.
Sweet.
All right, then I'm B Shadow J. I've used to contribute for the Rocket League Esports wiki. Now, I'm the main EU connoisseur for Octane, trying to help around doing some articles, and you'll quickly find out about me that I love arguing about stuff. So hopefully, I'll be a good addition for this.
I think that'll be perfect. Just help spice it up as much as we need to go full throttle into these topics. I had to do that one. I apologize for anyone who doesn't like the cringiness of some of my puns. But we are going to be getting into our first topic of the night, which is the RLRS NA Play-ins. So now that we've had our 4 qualifiers and they've concluded, we have our top 128 teams for each region. Out of these 128 teams, only 4 of them will be able to advance to the RLRS. So Slock, who are the favorites to qualify for the rival series in NA?
So let me just start off by saying that this is very difficult to predict because there's just like not that much data to go off of. Uh, Despite saying that, there is like a clear few teams that are like above the rest. However, any team can on their good day be able to take a game off these teams and qualify. So for like my top like 2 teams, I actually have Splice, as many people would also have, because they've looked solid in recent weeks. I think 2 weeks ago they won Nexus, Rival, and ESL on 3 consecutive days.
Wow.
On February 10th, 11th, and 12th, they won those 3 tournaments, and we haven't really seen them since then, which is probably to not give away their secrets to other teams, make sure that they're still at the top. And then my other team is actually Manhattan, which is a team consisting of Malachus, Ajax, and Timon with Aunt Jemima as a sub. And I think most people would probably be surprised with me putting them as my top 2 teams, but they're really strong and have been taking games off these notable teams. They won Rival Cup a few weeks ago, where they beat a team of Vince, Memory, and Illusion. They beat Genesis in that same tournament, and they beat Lights Out. So I think that those 2 teams are like my locks for RLRS.
Yeah, so the way we're doing the play-ins for EU and NA this time around, giving our thoughts of what teams are going to make it, what teams might not make it, we're doing locks, tips, dark horses, and sleepers. So locks is the teams that we think are guaranteed to do well, probably 50% or better to make it into the RLRS. Then tips are the teams to watch, solid chances going in deep into the qualification in that play-in. And our dark horses, obviously people know what dark horses are, but for those who don't, it's a team that has played very well but hasn't generated too much attention and still stands a strong chance to surprise a lot of people. And then the sleepers, teams with some crazy flashes of brilliance sometimes that could like show up at one point in time and do amazing, beat some top competitors and could really make a run at it, but that's only if they are performing well. So, B Shadow, who are your locks for the NA scene?
Well, like Slock, I also add Splice. I think that's basically one everyone should be able to agree on. That is pretty guaranteed trust. But then, maybe it's because I'm an European, so I may be behind on the times, but I'm still riding the dude's hype train, and I'm still fairly confident on their ability to make it to the RLRS.
That's a pretty good statement about that. I know the dudes who themselves have been saying they've had a few subpar performances as of late against some teams, but they know when to play, and they've showed some great results against some RLCS level teams. Dexy, I'm gonna throw a question your way. Is there a team we might be overlooking that has a good chance for a spot into the rival series? Dexy, your mic's muted, by the way.
I think a lot of people are overlooking Incognito. I think they've got, they got Tuster, Gorax, Go, and Derek, and then Nicky Mac, I believe.
Nicky Mac's their starter. Derek's
oh, really? Okay.
Still a pretty solid squad.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid squad. I think they are overlooked, just because they're not huge names, like Pluto or Karma or Dude with the Nose. So I think they're going to be able to make some noise. I don't know if I would call them a lock, but they're definitely a team to look out for. I definitely think they're underrated in comparison to all the rest of the teams that are there. Yeah, definitely a team to look out for.
Yeah, so they played in RLRS last season, where I can't remember exactly how
they got 7th, I believe.
Yeah, they were in the bottom 4, so they didn't retain their spot in the league. And following the RLRS, Jay Wismont, who I think most people would agree was their star in quotations player, and he left to join. Yeah, he left to join Splice, and so they really lost a lot in losing Jay Wismont. And during last season, their sub was Nicky Mac, and now he's been promoted to becoming their starter. And so it'll be interesting. They haven't really competed in many weekly tournaments at all, so we don't know how they're actually looking.
Yeah, personally, that's the main reason why I haven't really rated them yet, because even though, like you said, Jay Wismont was probably the best player on that team, and without them playing many tournaments, it's hard to tell how their new starter has been doing alongside the 2 old teammates of that team.
It's understandable. So who would you say are your tips, the teams to watch that have a solid chance of becoming maybe a lock in the play-ins?
So I didn't put the dudes as a surefire lock, and I do have them as a team to watch. The reason I don't have them as a lock is because we don't know what's going on with Joro and his SAT situation. So they may, with not having to play, not being able to play with their full lineup from the very start, they may potentially have some issues and fall to the losers bracket early, having to play with their sub CS3.
I still think they're I think they'll be able to hold out enough time to get Joro back in time, and even still, I feel if they had to go through the lowers, they'll still do it. I think they're a very capable team that they should still be able to go through on the lowers if they have to. But kind of the same reason, but backwards is I've heard Manhattan has been doing very well, but I'm not as confident as you are yet in calling them a lock, which is I put them on my list. I put them as tips instead of lock.
Understandable. What do you guys think about Space Station Gaming? I know there's been a lot of buzz around them, especially since they just became a squad recently, getting back into competitive. I know the team consists of Overzero, Espeon, Lemon Puppy, and they have Laz as their sub. A pretty solid squad. Do you think they deserve a spot in the tips section for the play-ins, or do you think they're more of a dark horse?
I think they're definitely a tip. One of the things is this team has some pretty big names. Overzero, he obviously retired and then he came back. But Espeon, everyone knows Espeon's name, and Lemon Puppy was in RLCS, so everyone knows his name. So I think this is of the teams that are here and the names that are here, this is the biggest team name wise, but skill wise, I think there's some questions just because we haven't seen them play a ton together in big events. And I think there's a lot of other competition here that is better than them, but just isn't as established online, name wise. So I think they're a team to watch for sure, and I think they really have a chance if things go their way. If they win a couple series, down the stretch, I think they have a chance to make it top 4. But I think it's going to be a challenge for them, just because they're such a new squad. I mean, they just came together this season, and it's also Espeon's last season, so there's a lot riding on there's a lot riding on them.
Yeah, we don't have enough results and data to back up for them being like a lock into getting a spot for sure, but we know they have a good chance at it. So speaking of other teams that might have a good chance, the dark horses, who are those teams that you're looking to maybe make some upsets in the plans?
Right, so I think one of the teams that me and Shadow both have as like our dark horse is Zabumafu.
Love that name.
Yeah, it's
It's a brilliant name. It's T. Coral, Austin, and Jay Vogel with
Yeah.
Garen as sub.
yeah, and
And
I think this team is like a relatively unknown roster besides Austin, who's been around for an insane amount of time. He's been like on the bubble like players list for like 2 years now, pretty much. The team together, they won like Rival Cup a few weeks ago, and then I think last week or 2 week, and then the week after that they lost to Space Station in the finals. So they have had solid performances in the Rival Cups. So they're definitely a team to watch.
One team I haven't heard mentioned in a while, and there's always been some like wishy-washy results that I think could potentially be a dark horse, would be Love Bread Sports. Do either of you agree on that?
I actually had them as a dark horse, so I think even though the results are kind of wishy-washy, like you said, I think they're still a fairly capable roster. Their roster for the record is Cuthbert, AJ, and Jet with, oh my god, I can't even say this. Kuteramasa.
Just say cut. That's what his like shortened form is cut.
I tried.
Yeah, it's very
Cut,
difficult.
Yeah, a sub. And like skill-wise, I still think all these players are individually very capable, but yeah, it's just not really been translating into the results, which is why it's hard to put them as anything above dark horses.
Yeah, I definitely think there's one of those rosters that you want to see do well.
Yeah.
Just because like all those guys are, along
so
with
great.
like the lights out guys, are such great guys. Like I got to meet them at the World Championship in November, and like all were like really nice guys, and they're all like really skilled at the game. So you want to see them succeed. But I think if you have to look at where they place versus all the other teams that are here, and I just don't think. I think they have a chance, but I think it's a long shot. Like it's not even 50-50. I think it's like I think they would have to pull some upsets.
They'd have to be like performing out of their mind, basically. Is what you're saying.
They'd have to have the weekend of their life to get in. But I think they have a shot. That's why they're in the conversation, and I think they're going to be seated pretty high. But I think it is going to be tough for them.
Yeah. Speaking of Love Bread Sports, I know Lights Out, their counterpart, probably have a better chance at making it as well. I know some of you had them as your tips. Do you want to kind of explain the difference between Lights Out and Love Bread Sports for those who might not know?
So these two teams like had a 6-man roster at some point where they just spent like a few weeks deciding like the best combination of players that they can like put out on their two teams. And I think the team that they went with, Aeon, Nomad, and Toe, is probably like the best team that they can come up with that combination of players. Nomad, who previously played on Kinematics in the last season of RLRS and has played on countless teams that are in like right outside top 10. He has a lot of experience, and Aeon and Toe are kind of newish players who people may not have heard of as much. But I think the roster together they've had good results. They've like beaten like Splice in Nexus a few weeks ago, I think.
Oh, wow.
And so yeah, they've had solid results.
That's good. And speaking of solid results that we hope to see from these teams, the sleepers, who would you say are really the ones we might want to keep an eye on, but we probably won't see them too much throughout the play-in?
I'm going to go right off the bat here. Bold prediction sleeper is Team Dive, the only PS4 team that is consistently at the top.
Oh, wow.
which consists of
PS4 players, man.
Fifi, Uncle Ben, and John with Money Nab as the sub. So they're PS4 players, and I think they're all PS4 players. Like, there's no mix here.
Yeah, they're all PS4.
And they were in the play-ins last season, and they lost to two teams that eventually made it into RLRS, I believe. At least one of them was. I think they lost to Ambition.
Oh yeah, I
and
believe they did
I can't
actually.
remember the team that beat them in the lowers. So they're able to compete at that level while being on PS4, which is like a severe disadvantage.
Imagine how they'd be if they moved on to PC. That'd be insane.
Yeah, and I actually got to meet Uncle Ben at the World Championships in November. Like, he was hanging out with the Loaf Bread Sports and the Lights Out guys. Like, super cool dude. So it would be cool to see him go pretty far. I think they can compete, but I think it is like a pretty long shot, a pretty big long shot. So definitely a sleeper for me.
I also want to see like John being able to make it, because he's been like, just like a lot of these players, he's been around forever, like since the first season of RLCS where he played with October Sky, and he's played with like so many like notable players like Lemon Puppy, Jay Wismont, all these players that made the transition from PS4 to PC while he remained on PS4. So it'd just be great to see him be able to make the jump to like RLRS and beyond.
How about you, B Shadow? Do you have any sleepers that you're looking out for?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. Since this is not my region of expertise, this was starting to scrape a bit of
Like, oh, there's the barrel. There's the bottom of it.
Yeah. But I was looking at results because, I mean, there's not a lot, but there are some. And I saw two teams that really caught my eye, and those were United as one, which is Zombie Poop Shark. Yes, that's his name. Asfura and Explosive Gyro 2. And the other team is Shake and Bake, which is Europe, Zerasi, and Bell. And those teams caught my eye because they've actually won a series versus teams that I highly rate. So specifically, United has won on the monthly ESL, which happened about a month ago. They actually won 4-1 versus the Dudes, which is a very impressive result
Oh, wow.
in my mind. And then, if I can actually find it, Shake and Bake also won against Space Station, if I'm not mistaken. I'm having trouble finding the result, but I do remember they won against Space Station 3-0, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So that's also a really impressive result. And just because of that, like, they've literally fit the definition of sleeper, right?
Yeah, I was about to say that fits it to a T.
Brilliance.
Like, you got the perfect teams to fill out your sleeper column. One team we haven't really mentioned yet, which I'm sure a lot of people are looking out for, is Genesis. Slock, what are your thoughts on Genesis?
I mean, I think Genesis is an interesting team because we haven't really heard of Rapid or Shock as much. The thing I like about Genesis is that we have like a veteran player in Pluto, like picking up these like newcomers and like working with them and developing them as players and trying to make the jump back into the RLRS. So, I mean, it'd be great to see Pluto back in
Oh yeah, that'd be
RLRS,
awesome.
yeah, and I think I just like that Pluto is like taking the time to work with these new players.
Yeah, and he's had some pretty decent results in some weeklies, but you know, it's a good spot to put him in like the sleeper position or maybe the dark horse. I wouldn't guarantee him a spot. We could definitely see them perform pretty well. So that pretty much wraps up the NA plans. Any other teams any of you guys forgot to mention that you are looking out for to maybe make a run at those 4 spots that are remaining?
I just want to make a correction real quick. It wasn't the Genesis roster is Pluto, Rapid, and Roll Diz.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, and one team I don't know if either Slugger B Shadow J mentioned is Small Balls with Nap, Prem, and Fresno.
I don't believe we talked about it now.
No,
yeah,
we didn't.
So Nap was the former sub on G2. I think it's
C9. C9.
C9,
Oh, C9,
yeah.
Yeah.
Last season. And so now he obviously he's not the sub anymore. He wanted to start on his own roster, and Prem has been around forever. So those are some pretty decently big names, some highly skilled players. So, you know, I think they're your dark horse sleeper area. They could if they put together a couple good series, I think they could make a run.
Yeah, and Prem was on Myth last season with Geno Cop and Gambit, and they were barely out of the top 4. So with Prem on that team, Nap, who's a sub of, or was a sub of Cloud9, who also made a decent run in the qualifiers a while back for Gnarly, and then Fresno, who's been around for quite some time. That is definitely a dark horse team to look out for. And I know, Slack, you were about to mention a team as well? Or was that B Shadow?
Oh, no.
I also was gonna mention small balls
Okay.
because like they're just like I mentioned earlier, like I just love seeing like these long time like veteran bubble players like trying to finally make the jump, and
Yep.
it'd be great to see like players that have put in like so much effort into trying to become a professional in the past 2 years finally get rewarded.
It'll be great to see exactly what teams make it. And for those of you who are unaware, the NA play-in is actually this Saturday. The exact times, I'm sure you could find a link somewhere. Someone will link it to you. It'll be on the Octane website as well for sure. But that'll be good to follow along with the bracket and see exactly which team you're hoping to make it, how far they make it, where they place, and how everything goes down on Saturday. But now we're going to move on into the RLRS on the EU side, and I'm sure B Shadow has been excited for this part. And now that we've discussed it for NA, we got EU. Shadow, who are your favorites to qualify for the rival series on EU?
Well, I feel there's 3 big teams. They are pretty much very likely to make it to RLRS, and those teams are Method, WLF, and Epsilon Esports. I'll say the rosters in case you're not aware. Method is they're 2/3 of the old Reason Gaming roster. It's Rex Ronde, Burrito B, and now Chekaron, who was on the old Team Endpoint and then moved to this new roster. And Team WLF, which is a team that has been having a fantastic offseason, which is composed of Money Talk, Arju, and Lingdao. And finally, Epsilon, which was formerly known as With My Boys. And the roster is composed of D7, Fakeout, and Pugsy. And honestly, I feel those 3 teams are like are way better than all the others and are pretty much guaranteed to make it to RLRS.
Yeah, those 3 teams have had like incredible like off seasons compared to the rest of the teams. If we take a look at Epsilon, all 3 of those players like finished at the top of like the Gfinity Challenger standings. Together they won a couple of Gfinity Cups. They placed highly in most of them, even beating like RLCS teams like Excel and like pick up RLCS teams consisting of like KDOP, Chusset, Fair, like whoever's playing.
Scrub Killa, whoever.
Etc. Yeah. But yeah, it was just like it's great to see like these new players who've just had like incredible success in these Gfinity weekly cups, daily cups even because there's 4 a week.
Pretty much, yeah.
But yeah, it's just great. And if we take a look at like WLF, like they've had like the same sort of like success in like these weekly tournaments where they're placing highly day in and day out. I think with WLF, the biggest thing is like we saw them at the Hyper Cup where they had like an incredible performance, and that's what really.
Oh, that was insane.
That's really where people were like, "Oh shit, this is like a real team." Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, they knocked out Flipside in the groups, and then when they went into the playoffs, they beat PSG in the quarterfinals, which PSG went on to win DreamHack.
Yeah, so
like, no small feat. Yeah, then they eventually lost the Team Secret, but just placing top 4 in Hyper Cup, where like the best teams in Europe were competing, it's just incredible.
Yeah, even then, about continuing to talk about the WLF some more, like even on the Gfinity competitor cups, like they also had some extremely good results, like so much so that over the last few months they actually have like a positive record over Secret with all the Gfinity wins they've had alongside, and also like other teams like Nordavind, they're also positive, pretty sure. With My Boys, they actually have a tied record, 88, but Ares, which is the old Team Endpoint, now with 7M, they also won 3-2 on a Gfinity Cup Competitor Cup on February 14th. And they pretty much have beaten every other team in RLRS play-in, really. So that's why I put him as a lock.
Yeah, they're not guaranteed, but they have, like, as we mentioned, over 50% chance of
The
making it
biggest
for
issue
that
for
spot.
any of these locks really is how they perform. It's
Yeah, that's for any of the
on the
teams, to be
play-ins.
honest,
Yeah,
though.
like we all remember season 3
Oh, no.
Iris. I had to bring it up. There's always that chance, and like fortunately I think by now teams are just prepare themselves too well and are too focused to not let that happen again.
True.
But it's basically just like Harris really only lost because of themselves. These 3 teams, I feel, if they don't make it, it'll be because of themselves more than anything.
Kind of like how Fnatic last season didn't make it into RLCS when they totally should have, and then they just stomped RLRS and then earned their spot there. So
Yep.
we could potentially see something similar. They're not the same quality of Fnatic, but with these Method, Team WLF, and Epsilon making their runs towards the play-ins, they'll have not an easy path, but it's more guaranteed for them to get a spot, I guess.
Yeah, the play-ins is definitely about showing up and performing on that day.
It's one day, yeah.
You have one day to prove that you belong at the top, and so you just gotta make do with what you came into the play-ins with, and try to beat the teams that are in your side of the bracket.
Yeah, so going back to the teams, those 3 teams that we've mentioned, Method, WLF, and Epsilon, are like clearly like the top 3 going into the play-ins. So I mean, there's like a bunch of other teams, but I think we all agree that those 3 will
probably have a spot, and then it's like a fight for the 4th spot. And what are some of those teams that might be fighting for the 4th spot?
Personally, like on my list, I chose 3 tips, but honestly, there's a lot more I could have chosen. But I chose specifically Triple Trouble, which is Ronicky Andam and Tadpole. I also chose Pleb City, which is Zeto, GMS, and Gary Gorlap. And finally, Taxibill with Frizz, Waffle, and Didris. All of those teams are super solid, also had some very good off seasons, and they could also very well take that, I'm going to say last spot, but they could just steal them from the top 3 very easily as well. So they should also make it very far into the bracket.
So one of the other teams that I have that's like in addition to what Shadow said that are like going to be competitive with these teams is Zebra Nose, which consists of Zenzus, Mout, and Nexo.
Oh wow.
And Zenzus is obviously ex-player from Excel. He got removed from the team because they wanted to bring in Marky Duda. So he's an RLCS player who's playing with these new players, similar to like Pluto, playing with Roldiz and Rapid, where he's picked up new players and is going to be trying to re-qualify for RLRS. Mout's been around for a long time. He's been on several bubble teams. He's played in the Gfinity Elite Series a ton, so he has a lot of experience. And I think the most interesting like pickup as a 3rd player that they've had is Nexo, because Nexo like showed up huge during I believe it was the DreamHack Leipzig qualifiers with Veritas, where Nexo, Tigray, and Alex made an incredible like run through the lower bracket.
That was insane.
Taking out teams like Excel, Fnatic, Team Secret. They beat all those teams, knocked them out. So I think Nexo really made like a name for himself there, and I think more people realize his potential.
I do want to say also about Nexo some more, just to praise him a bit more. Like, I even think that so far that he's probably the best player on this Zebra Nose team. So I really think I actually put him as a dark horse just because they haven't really played much lately. They're pretty much a brand new team.
Yeah.
But they definitely have the talent to just make it really far. I'm gonna say every team is gonna make it very far, because that's just how EU works pretty much.
There's so much depth to EU that you're like, I'm just gonna throw every team name into a hat and then pull 4 out, and that's who's gonna qualify.
Honestly, that's how it feels sometimes with EU. Every team has a very good shot, but
I mean, look at the power rankings; they're always all over the place too.
But I try my best to separate them somewhat into categories, which is why I put Zebra Nose a bit below. because of them being a new team, which could jeopardize their chances. They won't be as solidified as other rosters will be.
Yeah. Dexter, do you have any teams that we might be underestimating that might deserve a spot in the tips, which is teams to watch have a solid chance, or the locks that we pretty much have almost a guaranteed spot in the top 4?
Sure. So I don't think they're a lock, but hashtag United, I think, has a chance to run pretty deep. They're obviously in the Gfinity Elite Series, and they're also going to be the play-ins. It's Doomsy, Flarky, and Data.
Mhm.
Doomsy's been around forever, so is Flarky, and I think Data's been around for a long time too.
Oh, yeah.
So definitely,
Yeah, season
definitely
1.
like a fan favorite squad maybe. Like outside of the top 3, I think it's probably like, the one you want to see do well, but I think it's so stacked in both NA and EU that it really comes down to who performs. So I think if Doomsy can channel his Doomsy dish, he can Doomsy dish.
He can deal his
entire
dish to the
bracket.
competition.
I think they can go pretty far, but so I think they're a team to watch, but I wouldn't put them down as a lock.
Yeah, that's a solid assessment.
No.
So now that we have like our locks and our tips for EU plans, what are the dark horses, the teams that kind of like look out for that could upset those 3 that we might have guaranteed? Method, WLF, Epsilon, potentially Triple Trouble. We mentioned Zebra Nose as well. Who could maybe upset those teams?
Well, on my list, I actually had hashtag United and Zebra Nose, but since we already talked about them,
I can
I'm
see
gonna
them being
skip,
dark
and I'm
horses.
Yeah, it's just very, very close for me. But I'm going to talk about my third pick, which is Placebo. And it's McLovin, Godsmilla, and Al Dente.
Oh, wow.
The McLovin Al Dente duo has actually been really, really solid as well during the offseason. They just never had a solid third until like a week or 2 before the play-ins lock-in closed, the registration. But with Godsmilla as well now, they've also had some really good results lately, and they're a very capable team. McLovin, I think, is like super underrated as well, and even Godsmilla and Al Dente as well are not that known, and they definitely will surprise people, in my opinion.
I could see that happening. Any other dark horses that we might not know of, Slock?
So yeah, I think we covered Placebo, which was probably my biggest dark horse, and Shadow talked a little bit about Pleb City as a tip. I think another dark horse is Nordavind, which is the all-Norwegian team consisting of Etrex, J-Wolves, and Reganam. So Reganam is a name we haven't heard in a long time. Reganam he played in the first split of the first season of RLCS. And
Wow.
since then, he hasn't been in the RLCS, and I really haven't heard much from him. But it's really good to see that he's trying to make a comeback with this team. And I love teams comprised of like the same nationality. It just makes me feel good. I don't know why.
Maybe
I mean,
they'll
it
like
helps with
go and do a LAN
communication.
or something at their own houses and be like, hey, let's get some pizza and then play together and hopefully it works out.
Yeah.
I mean,
But yeah.
there is some merit to that as well. Just communication-wise, it's they're just it's obviously much easier to speak on the native tongue instead of like actually having that extra processing power on translating
sense.
to English. So
Especially in Europe, where there's so many more languages packed into.
it's
Yeah.
a valid
the same
thing.
space.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that team's also they're going to be competing in the Gfinity Elite Series, so that should give them a bunch of practice, which well actually that hasn't started yet. But even if they don't qualify for RLRS, they'll have that to fall back on.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that they're in the potential to qualify for RLRS. They've had solid results just like the rest of these teams. I mean, like we said, pretty much any of these teams can qualify for RLRS. So yeah, we'll just have to see. I just like I said, I just like the national teams.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. One team we haven't mentioned yet, which I noticed that Slog has as one of the sleepers, Copenhagen Flames. What are your thoughts on that team? They've had some pretty good performances recently, especially at DreamHack, but Have they been a little bit too inconsistent to be considered like a tip or maybe a dark horse? Like maybe they're
So
just
this
like
is
waiting for the right moment.
so the Flames are also another national team. They're all Danish, consisting of the same roster they played with in season 4, uh, of Abeagond, Fruity, and Becca. And I think you can't really count out the Copenhagen Flames because every season they make it far in the RLCS qualifiers. Uh, they did do good and decent in the DreamHack, but they've been in sort of a lull recently because I've been looking at the Gfinity results and they haven't really been making it too far, maybe like top 16, sometimes top 8. But yeah, like I said, we can't really count out the Flames. They're always making it far.
I was there waiting for their right moment to strike, and
Yeah.
hopefully that'll be these plans. But there sure is some other teams that we could mention as well. Dexy, do you have any you might be looking out for?
Yeah, I have a sleeper that no one is gonna like,
Oh God.
and it's
Okay.
Let's see who it is.
and it is the most skilled team in Europe is Jazer,
Oh, okay.
Krazak, and Ericsson.
I can definitely agree with that.
I can stick behind that. I thought you were gonna say like some random team that no one's really heard of. That's like,
an
man, you're gonna
actual
shock the
legit
world.
team.
Okay.
No, so those are the one
Bergson's
men.
their sub, by the way.
Yeah, it's
MK's
Okay.
playing.
That's
yeah,
what I
it's the
assumed, but-
freestylers
It's the
team.
freestylers, yeah.
Yeah, so that's like the YouTube sensations.
I can definitely agree with that.
But I definitely think like they have a shot, just because they're always in the conversation, around like, are they at that level?
Yeah.
And so I think if you're at that conversation, if you're in a conversation, then you are at that level. So, I definitely think they have a chance, but obviously it's so stacked, so we'll have to see.
Well, yeah, those 3 players are probably some of the most mechanically gifted players in all of Rocket League,
Yeah,
and it'd be interesting to see them playing in the RLRS, and it'd probably boost popularity of the RLRS to have these big YouTubers
yeah,
be playing in it.
I know Psionics would love if they made it through. But yeah, I could definitely see why I would think they're a sleeper like Jazer is really solid. I definitely agree, is RLRS tier. And I mean, he was trying out for the Jitsu kids and they didn't do too well. And they didn't really share if their loss at DreamHack was the main reason why Jazer left or if it was something else. But I think it would have been a good fit on that team, to be honest. But either way, now he's here. He's trying to make it in, and is with Krazak. Krazak actually, I don't know if you guys remember, he was 1 series away from qualifying in season 2 when he was playing with Team Luminous. It was with Gontho, and the third is escaping me,
Supra?
but yes, exactly. Thank you, Supra. And they lost against Oh My Dog on the lower bracket game, and so he's from there. I've actually really been impressed with his play, but he's never really played competitive much from then on. Unfortunately, he's been around a bit. Like after that, he was with Leaf, played with GMS, for example, as well, but never really had as much success as he had back then. And MK, well, I'm not as familiar as I am with the other two, but I mean, he does freestyle, so he must be mechanically good, right? So I don't think he'll bring the team down by any means, at the very least. So I think they'll have a good shot at it.
Going back to Krazak, if you remember back in like right after season 3 World Championships ended, like the teams were like shaking up, and Krazak actually played with Jazer and Chaussette as Weedham Moyes for a bit.
Oh yeah,
And they
yeah.
played in the summer series, and
That
I
was
think in the
great.
summer series they lost to Envious, and then for whatever reason, following their loss and like in the weeks after, Krazak decided to just retire, while
Unfortunate.
Chaussette obviously went to a Frontline or PSG, and Jazer, I
Yeah.
forget what Jazer did.
Thanks for correcting me, because I'd forgotten about that team completely.
But yeah, I think a lot of people were excited to see Krazak playing or competing for the RLRS or RLCS, and they obviously didn't get the chance to see that, and now they will have the chance to see that.
So before we end off the EU play-in section, any other teams that we might have forgotten to mention that could give a good run towards the top 4 spots?
So I have 2 sleepers on my list, and the teams that I put as sleepers are Suka, which is also an all-Italian team. So
national teams.
Once again, exactly the advantage. It's and that team is Kritoro, MX22, and Tiz with Gonto SF. And then, which I think, even though they haven't had a lot of results, they're all really solid players. Like MX22 is always being known as the number 2 Italian player. Just Cooks here on the way. Oh well, unfortunate for him. But also Tiz and Kritoro are also really mechanically solid players, and I feel they could, if they show up on that day, they could definitely upset a bunch of teams. And on the same train of thought, Classic, which is composed of Marvin, Radio, and Tubi, are also really gifted players. Their offseason, they've played a bit more, and they've actually, this has been a long time ago in January 25th, but they actually won against WLF way back then, and they've also had some decent results against other team. They also had a 2-3 result versus Team Endpoint on the start of February, and some other wins against some other teams. They also won versus Suka, which I previously mentioned, and ended up losing Nordavind on the finals on the rival of February 10th. So I think they've shown they could definitely upset teams, but I don't think with how stacked EU is, I can't put them above sleepers really.
Yeah, I think another thing to mention with what was their team name? Classic. They used to go by Planet Key Dynamics or Unspecified.
Way back then, yeah.
They were actually one of the top teams to qualify for RLCS, or in consideration to qualify for RLCS back in season 2, season 3. So it's great to see those guys at that level again.
Yep.
Well, that pretty much wraps up the EU section of the play-ins. Now we're going to move over across the pond. Well, I guess not across the pond, all the way down under the pond.
Across the world.
Across the world. That works a lot better. Across the world to the Throwdown RLCS OCE play-ins. So those happened this past weekend to, I believe it was the top 16 teams that got qualified for that, and then they have some more steps to go. We saw a lot of the top teams in OC competing in the Open Series in the last month, and that was a great show and spectacle with a lot of great talent testing out their new rosters as they were warming up for the RLCS season. And now that these teams have had to fight their way through to the Open Qualifier and to make it back into the next Throwdown event, the RLOCE Championship, Slack, who are the favorites to qualify for Throwdown Season 5?
So yeah, there's currently 6 spots open in the Throwdown Season 5. Chiefs and Tainted Minds already qualified for it by because they made it to the World Championships last season, so they automatically retained their spots in the league. I think for the most part, we're going to see the same teams we saw in the Open Series, which we talked about in the last 2 episodes. So there's 4 matchups in the winners bracket. We have Darksided versus Weasel Mafia. Darksided is likely going to win that. Jam Gaming versus Noisy is Toxic. Jam Gaming is likely going to win that. Legacy versus Yeah Right. Legacy is likely going to win that. And then the only match I'm a little hesitant on is Love Dex versus Simple Physics. Both of these teams competed in the Open Series. Just based on performance, I want to say Love Dex is going to take that. Simple Physics finished last place in the league with a record of 3-18. So I don't really see them taking out Love Dex. So yeah, I don't really see any upsets in the upper bracket. We'll see all 4 of the higher seeded teams will qualify for the Throwdown Season 5. What's going to be interesting is the losers bracket. So 2 teams will qualify from the losers bracket. The first spot will be actually, before I talk about the spot, let me just mention that last week there was one surprising result with Retirement Home, who was one of the Open Series teams. They got swept in the winners finals to move on to the top 16 by Noisies and Toxic. Therefore, they dropped down to the lower bracket
Wow.
on the first week of the qualifiers, and so now they're currently in the lower bracket for this week for the top 16. That means if they lose, they're just out. I still think that they will clutch it out and qualify through the lowers bracket. They have veteran players in Kia, Elusive, and Days. They had a ton of experience during the Open Series. Let me just pull this up real quick. So in the Open Series, Retirement Home actually finished 4th in the league play with a record of 3-4 matches, or 11 and 10 games. So they won more games than they lost. In the playoffs or the gauntlet finals, they lost 3-1 to Legacy, who was just on fire that day. So I don't think that they're a bad team. I think last week might have just been a little hiccup, and I think they will qualify through the lower bracket. In the lower bracket finals, because of how the bracket works, they'll either play Love Decks or Simple Physics. They'll likely play the loser of that, which means that one of the teams from the Open Series will not qualify for the next season of Throwdown. So
I have a question. There's already 2 teams that are qualified for the next season of Throwdown, correct?
Yeah, Chiefs and Tainted Minds.
Okay, so this is just to determine the last 6 spots, 4 for the winners bracket, 2 for the losers bracket. So who do you think are like the most likely to kind of earn those 6 spots remaining?
Well, I mean, I already mentioned Dark-Sided Jam.
Yeah, Dark-Sided Jam, Legacy, Love Decks. But I mean,
And,
I mean more like who could make those kind of upsets, do you think?
Oh, yeah. So that's really like what I'm going to talk about next is for the second spot. Like the 5 Open Series teams, I think will qualify straight up to the Throwdown. And I think the biggest like upset will happen in the final spot, where it's either going to be Noisies and Toxic, which they 3-0'd Retirement Home, which was a team from the Open Series, and that's not good, like an easy task.
Yeah.
So that consists of Noisy, Zest, and Classic Old Mate. So it'll be interesting to see if they can. And I think the other team that will likely qualify or has a chance of qualifying is the old Legacy Esports roster, which they fell in the Open Series qualifiers and didn't make it through, even though most people thought that they would. The roster consists of Plitz and Zen, and then after they were dropped by Legacy in favor of Legacy picking up their new team, Plitz and Zen teamed up with Sammy, and so that's probably another team that will qualify. So for my like I said, the 5 Open Series teams I think will qualify, and then the last spot, in my opinion, will go to either Noisies and Toxic or Legs or Silly. I don't know which one.
Yeah.
One of the 2.
It's kind of tough to tell in that lower end of the OCE teams. One thing to mention as well, how this is kind of different than other qualifying brackets, is whoever wins their first games in the quarterfinals will still make it and qualify in the winners in the winner's side of that bracket. So if Weasel Mafia somehow upset Dark-Sided, they'd be guaranteed a spot into league play, but Darkside would still have to fight for that spot in the losers bracket. So it's really going to be crucial for any of these teams that want to make those upsets and guarantee themselves a spot to win this first series in the winners quarterfinal, so that they don't have to play any more games. They are basically guaranteed that spot. And does that spot help determine seeding as well if they win their winners semifinal?
I don't know what you mean. What do you mean seeding?
Like looking at the Smash GG bracket, basically it just said, I guess both teams just make it regardless, but they fight each other.
Yeah.
So basically, no, I don't think they actually. I don't know why they play, because looking at the Smash bracket,
okay, so that might just be the bracket
Pretty
looking
much they
weird for
don't
me.
play,
So
yeah.
it's basically who wins this game qualifies, who doesn't win this
as
game
far
has
as
to
I know.
qualify in the losers bracket.
it's a single series to determine in the winners bracket. It's a single series to determine the first 4 teams that are qualifying.
Okay.
So
Exactly.
it can go anyway.
Confused by that.
So since Paz couldn't make it, he actually gave me some notes or things that he wanted to say. So I think I mentioned that Noisy isn't toxic as one of the teams that can bring upsets. Paz also mentioned that Weasel Mafia can bring major upsets and make league play, and the only thing holding them back is the possibility of bad scrims. So Weasel Mafia, Justice Robo, Angel, Bullet, and Syntech. So, I mean, I don't know much about OC like bubble teams, so if Paz thinks they're good, they're probably
Yeah.
pretty good and has the chance.
From my only very limited knowledge of OC, the only team which has players which I recognize is Azure, which is Slurpee Monster, Acticrunt, X Ames, and Lemony. And I was looking at the bracket, and they'll actually play against Weasel Mafia on the second round of losers bracket, assuming Weasel Mafia loses to Darksided, of course. So I mean, that'll be an interesting match as well, I feel, because from what I know, Acticrunt and Slurpee Monster are also very capable team players in OC, so we'll see. I guess Weasel Mafia will have a test right away on that second round, and then they'll be very warmed up for the match against Legs Arcili if everything goes as expected.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna mention that Hectic Run and Slurpee, they both played in the last season of Throwdown. In Throwdown season 4, they were playing under Conspiracy alongside Walcott.
Oh,
Walcott is now on Jam. So those players have experience and they can definitely make the upset. Paz also mentioned that he doesn't think that Simple Physics will be making it to the top 8 this time, and he thinks that if Noisy isn't toxic or Weasel Mafia cross paths with them, they should be able to close it out versus Simple Physics.
Some pretty solid predictions for the teams. And speaking of OC, we kind of, as you mentioned, seen a lot of the teams that were in that open qualifier make it all the way here, but they have so many series to play to try and make it into that spot. Like the winners, it's heavily sided for the winners side because they only have that one series, and if you're in the loser side, you potentially have 1, 2, 3 series you'd have to win to just get that spot into league play. So it's definitely going to be a battle on the losers side of that qualification for Throwdown OC, and we'll be seeing that pretty soon as well. Before I forgot to mention, but for EU, the play-ins for that is actually on Sunday. But when are the qualifiers for Throwdown OCE?
So Throwdown, like right after the NA qualifiers end, it'll go straight. Throwdown qualifiers will start that night, so Saturday night Eastern time, or Sunday for OCE.
Okay.
Basically, it'll be the most filled 36 hours of qualifiers you've ever
Yep.
seen.
Yeah.
And
So-
OC EU.
That's a lot.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely
so
gonna
it's
be a
like-
good weekend.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of Rocket League to watch, and
We also have Gfinity.
oh yeah, we have Gfinity.
Oh.
So
too.
we have there's
We'll
so
get
much
into
Rocket
that
League going
later.
on this weekend.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
It's like we had not much Rocket League, and everyone was just getting upset and like bickering about random gossip, and now we have like all the Rocket League shoved at us at once, and we can't just like digest it all at the same time. It's going to be a lot to go through, especially next week on Full Throttle. But before we get to next week, we do have our next topic for the evening, which I'm sure plenty of you have heard as well, that was announced recently. Complexity signing the X Method roster, which is the roster of Alot, Metzenaris, and Magnus. And they've moved around a bunch of the past year, have signed with Team Secrecy, Resonant, Esports, Method, and now Complexity. Dexy, how important is this signing for both the players and the organization, maybe even the scene itself?
Sure. So this is pretty big, right? A lot of people don't know the Complexity name. I've seen a lot on Reddit and Twitter, people questioning like, "Oh, what is Complexity?" And actually, so Complexity has been around for a while. They're like one of the longest standing organizations. So they have a really good foundation, and they know how to take care of their players, and they know how to work with developers and the other teams in the scene to make sure that everything like goes as well as it can possibly go. So it's really nice to have like a veteran presence entering Rocket League.
Oh yeah.
And then on top of that, Complexity was actually so Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, and John Goff, who I believe is like the president of
Something
the
like
Dallas
that.
Cowboys. He's a real estate investor. They purchased a majority stake in Complexity just last year. So I believe the Complexity like the actual organization, their offices are being moved or have moved.
Yeah,
to the
they
Dallas
have been
location.
moved.
Yep. So they're at the Star, which is the Dallas Cowboys sports facility. So obviously the players are in EU, so they're not going to be directly playing or practicing at that facility, but they're going to have access to those resources. And I'm sure that the organization is going to be able to, use some of that resources in Europe to set up facilities for them in Europe
Yeah.
to practice and to boot camp before events. And then when they come to NA for NA events, they're going to have that location in Dallas to prepare for events.
That'll be huge, actually.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge thing, I think, for player development to have that, all the staff that you would have that a normal sports team would have, like trainers, lifestyle coaches, all that kind of
Maybe
stuff.
have like sports physicians as well, or
Exactly,
psychologists,
yeah.
sports psychologists.
Yeah, all that stuff is like you see it in other esports, and it's
Yeah.
kind of new to Rocket League. A lot of people don't think it matters, but it definitely does. Like a lot of these players are doing a lot of the stuff themselves right now,
Mhm.
and having a system in place to help the players really actually helps them even more be able to focus on just playing instead of having to focus on all these other parts of what comes with being a professional.
Yeah, I know
So I
you
think it's
mentioned.
definitely... Go ahead.
Sorry, I know you mentioned how we're seeing that a lot in other esports, and a parallel with that is I saw in an interview recently, which is on HUD with Leaf and the lady who does the Northern Arena stuff. Marissa Roberto, thank you. I completely forgot her name for a second. Sorry about that. But one of the 100 Thieves players was mentioning how crucial it is to their mindset as a player that all they have to focus on is playing the game, getting better at that, than having to worry about managing their time and getting flights arranged and all that jazz for any of these tournaments and events that go on. And having more of that in Rocket League is definitely going to help as the esport expands, especially with EU teams coming over to NA, because like how G2 always has it in every single LAN and they do well at them. They have a boot camp they go to a week beforehand that their organization pays for, either in EU or NA, and they just play for a week straight, scrim other teams, play in the same environment so they're ready for that LAN stage. And that's going to be huge for complexity as well.
Yeah, I definitely like the trend of traditional like sports organizations getting involved in esports because they can bring a lot. They've had like decades of experience with like making sure that their players can be as competitive as possible, and just like bringing that to esports is just a great thing.
Yeah, and just if you're wondering like how big of a move this is, so obviously Complexity is not the Dallas Cowboys. Like they're not the same. They have the same owner now, or they have the same ownership or management team, and they're kind of mixed. So the Dallas Cowboys, the worth of the Dallas Cowboys is $4.5 billion.
Wow.
So that kind of
Damn.
that kind of resources backing you up not only validates you, but it gives you a lot of ability to be flexible and to hire the right people to do the right things. So obviously Complexity is reaching out into other titles besides Rocket League.
Yeah, I think Rainbow Six they were looking at or something like that.
But yeah, so hopefully, those resources will help the Method roster improve over time.
Yeah, I mean the Method roster has been sort of in like a downswing in recent like month or two, and so I think that this like backing will definitely help them like go back to their former glory, coming in second at the RLCS World Championships and like coming in second Universal Open and all those events.
Yeah, and speaking of that as well, we've had some interesting results in the off season for the X Method team now, Complexity. B Shadow, do you have any information you want to share with us about that?
About poor results of Method or now Complexity has not had the greatest results. We all see DreamHack, they were eliminated in the second day versus Flipside, was it?
Yeah, I believe it was.
And that was just another series where they just really did not perform up to their previous standard. And it's been like that ever since. We also saw in E-League where they got eliminated on the group stage, right? And ever since the World Championship, they just have not been up to the same standards. And hopefully, this complexity picking up the roster will, like it been previously mentioned, will be the motivation Kickstarter to put them back to better performance. Even still, this season, personally, I guess we're kind of going back a bit, or about last week, the RLCS predictions.
Mm-hmm.
I think complexity is still, regardless, sort of in a downward trend, and I'm not sure how quickly will they be able to recover from that. But that's for another day.
Yeah, there's so much more we could say about complexity and other RLCS teams, but the last topic we kind of have for well, I guess before we get onto that, are there any other orgs that either of you would be looking out to join the Rocket League scene apart from complexity, since they've been around for so long, and I'm sure there's like plenty that we've seen teased. I know Ninjas in Pajamas is one of them that's just like,
oh, no,
hey, we might get a Rocket
no.
League team. We might do it this time. Favorite our tweets so we can get a Rocket League team, but no, it's an R6 team instead or something like that.
So I definitely think for me, so I kind of started getting to NA LCS and EU LCS, and NA LCS in League of Legends. They moved to a franchise system, and with that, they had a lot of sports organizations buy in and buy a team. So I think for Rocket League, obviously they're not moving to a franchise system. Probably not anytime soon, but I think that Rocket League is so easily it's so easy to convert sports fans into Rocket League fans just because they're so closely matched. I think we'll see a lot of sports organizations that already have esports teams maybe branch out and pick up another title like Rocket League because it's so easy for a casual viewer to just pick it up and watch and enjoy. So obviously I don't think that there's any like talk about that right now. A lot of people are focused on like established esports orgs like NIP.
Yeah, I was going to mention TSM because but yeah, I think you have a better point.
Yeah, but I think you have a lot of teams that are interested in esports from like an investment standpoint. And so I think that'll translate over eventually.
We're seeing a lot of that too from like the FIFA teams, the Madden teams. I know there's like the NBA 2K League that's happening now, which is like been
the
huge.
Max Gaming, especially I remember seeing on Twitter, they were building a whole complex just for their NBA 2K team,
yeah.
So actually insane.
Can I just get CLG, please?
Yeah, I got the S7, so you can get CLG in. I think it's fair.
CLG is a good team.
If CLG picks up out of style, will you still be a CLG fan?
Ooh.
They'd be losing in LCS and in Rocket League then.
Yeah. Trust me, as someone who's been following the League of Legends for a long time, CLG fans are used to disappointment.
Yeah, I am used to it. They're being disappointed right now. Actually, no, they finished 2-0 this week, so never mind.
Yeah, nice. That's not even Rocket League, though.
Yeah, that's another thing. Getting back into the Rocket League topics, we have the last one for tonight, which B-Shadow will tell us all about, is the Gfinity Elite Series. And we've talked so much about RLCS and RLRS on this episode. So this event's actually starting this weekend, I believe, right on the 10th of March. So tell us all about that, B-Shadow.
So just as a refresher, I believe it was talked about last week, but just to remind everyone, so we have 10 organizations, which are all franchised into the league. And because it was increased from 8 to 10 teams, now they've changed the format. So now you have 2 groups of 5 teams each. And to remind you the groups, the group A as Excel, #United, Nordavind, Team Envious, and Team Vitality, while Group B as Harry's, Epsilon Esports, Fnatic, Method, and Unilad Esports. Overall, now that we actually know every single roster, because they've actually announced the drafts and they've announced the main rosters for every org, they even did a live stream, Gfinity, that is. Now we can actually accurately assess how these groups will do, and personally, I mean, we already could tell that these groups were not 100% balanced, because we could tell on Group A you have Excel, Envy, and Vitality, which are 3 RLCS teams, right? While on B you only had Fnatic, but even still, I guess coincidentally the groups ended up being somewhat better because you have teams like you have Envious, which instead of sending their main roster, once again they're not using the main roster. They're actually using Mout, Waffle, and Ignite. And Ramco is not even on the roster. Breezy is not also on the roster, and Devo is a sub. So I guess you only have 2 RLCS teams. Ignite is still playing, by the way, as a starter, but it makes sense because he's from the UK and it's London-based and it's a LAN.
And he's
on the other
really
hand,
good.
yeah,
And
he's
he has
really
a lot
good.
of experience on Gfinity lands.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fair. But even still, it's not the same team, right?
Yeah.
Mod and Waffle are not comparable to Devo and Ramco.
Are you sure about that?
I mean, RLCS will probably prove me
True.
wrong somehow because,
Oh,
but
goodness.
anyways,
That's another thing.
Yeah, and then we have teams like Ares, which people might not have been aware of, but Ares actually picked up the old Endpoint roster. So obviously without Chekaron because he went to Method, but Cheerio, Tini joined Ares and they picked up Sebadam to join him, which is also really not as capable as Chekaron in my opinion, but a very solid player as well. And he has also a lot of experience on Gfinity. So it's a very solid pickup. But on Group B, I guess the most hotly anticipated roster announcement of all time was for Unilad Esports.
Oh no.
Which I mean, we have to bring it up.
Yeah,
obviously.
we do have to bring it up. So for those, do you just want to go straight into what the controversy is that happened with this roster and
I
who
think
they
we
picked
might
up
as well,
and who they didn't pick up as well?
It ties in as well as the predictions we can do after. So just to let you know, so the team they picked up in the end is composed of Calix, Caro, and Speed as starters, and Flux, Teda, and Junior or JNR. I'm not sure how he wants me to say. Yeah, as their subs. And I mean, they're not a terrible team. They're not actually they're not completely awful. But Tadpole brought up on Twitter, and there's been a whole big mess and controversy of how they as in Triple Trouble alongside his teammates, they were going to be picked up by Reason Gaming, who was originally planned to be on the Gfinity Elite Series. But at the very last moment, Unilad actually bought the spot that ended up meaning that Reason was replaced. So Tadpole and his team basically had no longer a contract. And so they got into contact with Unilad, but Unilad, their manager, just after sending a message saying they would talk a day later, they just cut all contact. And then, as we saw later, they picked up a completely different roster, which is, I'm not sure if you guys have opinions on the difference of scale of rosters, but I would say it's a definite downgrade to Triple Trouble.
Triple Trouble is one of our teams that we had on our teams to watch list earlier in the day, or earlier when we were talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So they're definitely a better team, and they could have gotten like many of the other teams that we talked about for the play-ins. So there's definitely a bunch of better and more skilled teams that they could have picked up.
Going on to something just a little completely different, I just was looking at the rosters for Team Vitality. So is this the first time Pashy, Freaky, and Fairy are competing in Gfinity?
Yes.
They
since RLCS teams, or basically any contracted player, supposedly really was unable to participate in Gfinity Elite Series unless obviously the org itself was participating in Gfinity. So since Market beforehand was not in the Gfinity Elite Series and they were contracted to them, they could not play or participate in the main Gfinity Elite Series. But now that Vitality joined the Elite Series and they picked up that ex-Market roster, then yeah, now they're planning to participate on the main event, which is going to be exciting to watch.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably the group of death right there, because we have Team Envious, probably not as good, but they do have Ignite, Team Vitality, which is the actual roster, and some subs that are pretty decent. Nordavant's nothing to like scoff at. They're a pretty solid squad. Hashtag United is Doomsy, Data, and Flarky. And then Excel is their actual roster as well. Niels Cook, Pondex, and Marquis. So that's gonna be a crazy group. Do you think that these groups are kind of not really balanced? Could you say?
Yeah, I mentioned it previously, but yeah, I don't think the choice the way they made the groups right is they standardized the groups for all the 3 games they have on the Elite Series, which is Rocket League, FIFA, and
Street Fighter.
Thank you, Street Fighter. And they did it even before any organization really had the roster locked in. So there was really no way to make sure there would be completely fair groups right off the bat. And then right away we already knew that some teams were RLCS while others weren't. So
yeah,
it just made things worse. And so, yeah, after the rosters we see, as you mentioned, Group A is definitely a much harsher group to be on. And since only the top 3 for each group will move on to the playoffs, it's unfortunate for the 2 teams that are on Group A that are not going to make it.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Might have had a better on the other group. Even then, still, the Group B, it's not like it has terrible teams. It's
it just got
not
like
as
one
stacked.
RLCS team, which is Fnatic, but they still have some pretty good non-RLCS teams there.
I mean, the teams in Group B, we have Ares, which is RLRS team, and then alongside them we have Epsilon Esports and Method, we talked about them earlier, that those are like 2 of our biggest teams going into the RLRS play-ins, and we expect them fully to qualify for RLRS.
And then there's Fnatic, of course, and then Unilad. We'll just skip over them.
Yeah,
Unilad, they could probably upset.
They could,
and Calix and Karo are actually in the RLRS qualifiers, and they are playing under the team Big Town Boys, but instead of Speed, they have Phoenix, and they have Sack as their sub. But even still, like it's not only are they even for the RLCS qualifiers, they were a brand new team. For this, even more so. So it's really hard to judge how well they'll do. I mean, in theory, they got the easiest group, so in theory, there's a bigger chance for upsets. But even still, I think the difference in skill
between them and like the RLRS players,
plus the lack of practice and time, will probably mean they'll still get last place on that group.
I could see that happening. Dexy, I want to pose a quick question to you before we move on to the predictions for the Elite Series. Do you think with the RLCS player, well, I guess I'll ask B-Shadow first. Is this like really the first season we've seen this many RLCS players participate in Gfinity?
Yeah, I believe so.
So
with the addition, they added, sorry to interrupt, but they added actually the first 2 teams they announced they would be adding to the Gfinity Elite Series were Fnatic and Vitality.
Yeah.
Obviously, we didn't know at the time Vitality would pick up an RLCS team, but Fnatic, we knew they had an RLCS team. So just straight off the bat with those 2 teams, they obviously increased the number of RLCS teams. And I believe that none of the teams that got replaced after that were RLCS rosters, except the fact that Method got an RLRS roster because Complexity picked up the old roster. But even still, it's still a net gain.
So if like pretty much, I guess 4 RLC, well, let's see, not really 4, like
3.5.
Yeah, 3.5 RLCS caliber teams, and all these players who qualified through subbing and through the draft. Dexy, do you think this is a good breeding ground for the next RLRS capable teams for the next season if they don't qualify for this one, or just some good experience for them going forward after facing such strong teams?
Yeah, I definitely think Gfinity is like one of those events where players can progress or improve over time, and it's different than playing weeklies where half the time you could play a weekly and you're the only good team in the bracket. Like obviously there's decent teams that play in weeklies constantly, but the top professional level teams kind of shy away from weekly events just because the prize pools are starting to get too low for them for it to be worth their time. So if you want to improve, you have to play against the best players. And I think now you have some of the best players in this event. And so spending that time, multiple weeks playing against the best players, I think you'll be able to see these players improve and start to make their way up to that top level.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're missing on like the NA side, and we see a lot of that on OCU because they have so many events and lands as well. But getting into these predictions, I'll go back to you, B Shadow. Who are your predictions for the top 3 of Group A and Group B?
So the way I put them, I put on Group A, I put number 1, Vitality. I think that's pretty easy to see that they're the best team on that group, even though it's stacked. Especially Envy doesn't have their main roster, and Excel hasn't looked really hot lately as well. So just in the places they are, RLCS versus not RLCS, I mean it put them right away on the top right. So I put them number 1. I think they were pretty clear number 1. Then after, I was actually kind of torn, and I put Envy second still, and for a very simple reason, which is iGnite. iGnite will probably carry them.
iGnite is crazy. Yep.
Yes, iGnite is crazy, and Maut also has experience on the Gfinity Elite Series and Waffle as well. So I think they're still a very capable roster, even though they've never really made it to playoffs before. They've always just been on the edge. I think iGnite will solve that problem. And finally, I actually think Nordevent will make it as the number 3 seed. Because for various reasons, but I think generally RLRS teams just practice more for this, just because it's their best. It's just more stakes, overall. It's a bigger stage to prove themselves on, and Excel is, I feel, there's either one of 2 things will happen to them. Either they'll just be actually terrible in RLCS and it'll show in Gfinity as well, or they'll actually focus super duper just completely on RLCS in order to, as I think most people expect them not to do too well. I think they'll want to prove people wrong.
Yeah.
And obviously RLCS matters more than Gfinity, so I think it's more likely that team might use subs over the course of the year as well. So I think Nordevent will actually get that number 3 spot because of it. Oh, and then Group B, finally, I
Wait,
have...
one sec. While you're talking about Group A and you were talking
sure.
about Excel probably not going to show up because they haven't done really well. I just want to mention that Excel played with their full roster for most of the games in the last season of Gfinity in Season 2. And despite doing that, and we already said that there wasn't that many RLCS teams, they still didn't qualify for the playoffs, and they finished the season with a record of 2-5, which is pretty bad considering they were an RLCS team.
Yeah.
So I think that's another reason why they won't be on the top 3. But moving on to Group B now, I think the first team as well is fairly obvious in this case, which is Fnatic, being the only RLCS team on that group. I think it's pretty obvious. And then the number 2 is going to be Method, because obviously the previous champions of Gfinity Elite Series, they already have experience. Checkeron also has won Gfinity Elite Series Season 1 with Endpoint. So it's a very stacked roster with a lot of experience on Gfinity, which will probably carry them to the 2nd spot there. And finally, we have Ares, on number 3 as my choice. And Ares are the former endpoint roster, right? And even though Epsilon is on that group, I think the fact that they really don't have any LAN experience will mean they'll go, especially on those very first critical few weeks. It just means they won't play up to their standard, and they'll lose enough matches that it probably will mean they will not clinch a playoff spot over Ares.
Yeah. What do you think about those like predictions, Slock? Do you think there's any other team that could maybe? I know I'm trying to generate some
Yeah.
conversation, but it's probably not going to happen.
I pretty much expect exactly what Shadow says. I think me
Same
and him
here.
have the same exact
Yeah.
predictions going all the way through the end of
Yeah.
Gfinity Elite
Yeah.
Series.
Slock basically just look at my predictions and copy paste.
He's
them.
like, hey,
The
can I
only-
see your notes and
Oh.
maybe like change things up? But he didn't
Yeah,
change
just-
anything
just-
up.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, I don't see Unilad coming in the top 3. Actually, Epsilon could potentially
I can
finish in
see
the
that.
top 3. They could take over Ares. They're like I
Very
said,
possible.
we have the three teams that are at the top of the play-ins. We have Method. We have what was the other one? Method.
Fnatic?
No,
Method
RLS,
Epsilon.
but Epsilon.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
sorry.
Method, WLF, and Epsilon. WLF
Oh, okay.
is obviously not in the Gfinity Elite Series, but the players on those teams are spread across the various teams. But we had Epsilon. I think definitely have the ability to be one of the top teams. They came. All 3 of those players were the top 3 players at the end of the Gfinity Challenger Series. The only problem is that this is a LAN environment, and none of those players have played together on a LAN before. So that's why I'm hesitant in putting them in my top 3.
Dexter, do you have
mean,
any other? Well, not. Do you have any hope for Excel? Not Excel. Shoot.
Epsilon.
Yeah, it is Excel actually. Marky Doodad, do you
Oh.
think he's gonna perform in the Gfinity Elite Series, or as B Shadow was saying that they might just focus completely on RLCS?
I really don't know. I think Marky maybe has like some focus issues that we've seen from his Flipside days. Hopefully he's fixed that with the new roster, but I really don't have faith that he can turn that around and start putting back in the hours that he's lost. And you have to realize that in the time that he wasn't really playing Rocket League as much as he should have been, everyone else around him was. So somehow he has to find hours out of thin air that don't exist and get back. So unless he can figure out a way to progress faster than normal to get back to that mechanical skill level that is at the top level, I don't think he can contribute as much as people want him to this season. Maybe next RLCS season, if he sticks around, he'll be
They
kind
will
of back
make
up
it
there.
on the.
I
Yeah.
actually think Excel participating in the Gfinity Elite Series and having Marquino will actually help him a lot, because now he has Gfinity on Saturdays and then he has RLCS on Sundays. He's pretty much forced to play Rocket League.
Yeah,
at this
that's
Yeah.
true.
point. So that's good. Hopefully this will help him to get back to like what he once was, and
Maybe
Yeah.
that's what he
going
needed.
forward. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's definitely one of those things that you gotta consider when you talk about a player regressing and then trying to get back into it. Like Mike Rules is a perfect example of this. Regardless of any like off-field issues that he has, he's clearly still trying to compete because he's in play-ins, but he isn't putting in the effort. And if you try to come back after 6 months of not putting effort in, now you're 6 months behind everyone else that's been putting effort in for those 6 months. And so you have to find a way to make time, which just doesn't exist because some players play 8 hours a day. So
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
True.
crazy.
so I think in time, maybe he can improve and really help this roster. But like Slock was saying, he's forced to play now, so maybe that will help him.
Yeah, he's basically like given matches to play, and so he just has to take advantage of it to try to get back to
yeah.
his skill level.
Good point. Good point. Hopefully we do see more. I'm really rooting for Excel to just like upset everyone, because everyone's putting them going like 0-7 or like 1-6 in RLCS. And
They're
probably not
definitely the
doing well.
dark horse.
They are the dark horse. People aren't going to expect them to do well, and if they do well, I'm sure people will definitely be rooting for that team. But moving on to how the playoffs kind of work for Gfinity. Do you want to explain that for the viewers, and especially me? I don't really understand how they
Yeah, I
work
can
too well.
explain. So basically, from each group, the top team, the number one team from each group, actually has a bye straight to the semifinals. So they
That's pretty
skip
good.
one match, and then the number 2 seed and the number 3 seeds of each different group, so they cross, right? They'll play on the quarterfinals. It's single elimination, everything, and it's also best of 7. But so yeah, basically you'll see the number 2 team from Group A versus the number 3 team from Group B, and vice versa. And then the winner of those matches will play against the teams that had byes, as in like the number 1 teams from each group. So basically, just to give you an example with my predictions, right? Which I said that on Group A, Envy would be second, right? And on Group B, I said Ares will be number 3, so they would play together on the first qualifier, or the first quarterfinal, sorry. And on the second quarterfinal, it will be the number 3 seed Nordavind versus number 2 from Group B, Method, pretty much.
It's
And then
understandable.
the winner from the first match will play against the number 1, in this case from Group A, so it will be Vitality. And from the second quarterfinal, it will be the number 1 from Group B, so Fnatic on my case. But we should probably go one match at a time. So
Yeah.
on my example, the first quarterfinal, we have Envy versus Ares. And my prediction actually is that Ares will win. And Ignite is a beast, but Ares have too much Gfinity experience, and Envy have never really shown up beforehand. So I think they might actually falter at that point.
You think they won't be good enough to understand?
I mean, Ramco is. At least Ignite is there. Ramco isn't even there, so
And
who
he
is
did
good
play in the
enough to
previous one,
understand?
didn't he?
He played, but he wasn't even. He was technically not a starter as well. He
Yeah.
was only a sub as well. Mouth,
Gotcha.
Waffle, and I forgot who the third one was.
Freeze.
Friss. Yeah, exactly. Friss. They were the main squads for the Envy Academy roster. And
Yeah.
then the second quarterfinal, words are confusing.
Yeah.
I have Method versus Nordavind, and this one is easier to call
Yeah.
for me.
Who do you think's
Method
gonna
should
win? The Method team that we're rooting to like qualify and make it all the way
Yeah.
to the RLRS Play-ins and do really well in this. They have the experience from winning Gfinity Elite Series. I think they're probably pretty favorable in that matchup.
Yeah, and I agree. I have Method going to the semifinals as well.
So Slack, what do you think about the semifinal matchups then, based off of what B Shadow said?
Yeah, so I agree with this quarterfinal matchup. So I think the semifinals will be interesting because based on our predictions, we think that both of the RLCS teams, Vitality and Fnatic, will secure the buys in each of their group to make it to the semifinals. And so the first semifinal will have Vitality versus Ares potentially, where Ares obviously Tinny and Cheerio, they won Gfinity Elite Series in season 1, but we don't think that they're still at quite the level of the RLCS teams, and I think that Vitality will end up taking that. And likewise on the other semifinals, it's even though Method, they have Rix Ronde and Burrito B, who both won Gfinity last season, and we have Chacarone, who won in season 1. Don't think they're still quite at the level of Fnatic, and they should take that. So we'll basically be seeing sort of like a new age of Gfinity, in my opinion, where we'll see like the RLCS players like stepping in and being like, yeah, we're better and we're gonna be winning
Yeah.
this from now on.
To
So-
note though that the Fnatic versus Method roster or matchup will definitely be much closer, in my opinion, than the Vitality v Ares. If there's a semifinal to have an upset on, it will be the Fnatic
Oh, yeah.
v Method.
Yeah, and they've had some great results against RLCS teams, I believe, in like
Yeah.
the DreamHack qualifiers. Dexy, I'll throw this last one to you as well.
Sure.
Vitality versus Fnatic would basically be the finals. if things work out as we're predicting, who do you think's gonna have the upper hand? Who's gonna take home that Gfinity Elite Series championship, and why?
So both Slock and Shadow J are saying Vitality will win. So obviously I got to go against the grain here and say that I think Fnatic will take the win. It'll probably be like a super close series because they're both they're both obviously RLCS caliber. They are RLCS rosters. Yeah. I mean these players have played each other a million times, so they know the play styles. I think it'll be a really good finals.
Definitely.
I think it is kind of a toss-up. I think it'll go to like the final game.
Yeah, for sure.
I agree completely.
Final
honestly.
game, final goal. Who's gonna win?
Game
Vitality,
7
Fnatic.
overtime.
Oh, that'd be so good. I can't wait for this season to start.
Personally, the reason why I chose Vitality is just that their defensive game is just so strong and just tires the other team so much on land that I just think that they'll be able to just out-turtle Fnatic.
You know why else Vitality might win against Fnatic?
You tell me.
They've got Gregan as their coach.
Oh yeah, true. Gregan.
So Gregan on your team, not having Gregan, I think Gregan gives you the upper hand. So I'm definitely going for Vitality.
Gfinity has to rig it so Gregan wins, so they can say caster turn manager wins Gfinity.
Yeah.
No, it'll be a really close series either way. It'll be really good to watch, assuming everything goes according to plan, right?
You got to remember that this is a single best of 7. Like all of these matches are a single best of 7, and so
no double
realistically go.
It's EU, the region of upsets.
Yeah,
so
we saw plenty of those at DreamHack.
There's definitely always the possibility, even for RLRS teams, to upset RLCS teams, so you never know.
Okay, so we've talked about the RLRS NA Play-ins mentioned. Just to recap, probably Splice, Manhattan Dudes, or Space Station that have the best chance for them. There's some dark horses and sleepers mixed in there as well for the top 128, playing this coming Saturday qualify for those final 4 spots. For the EU Play-ins, the teams that we mentioned the most were Method, Team WLF, and Epsilon, and maybe even Triple Trouble in there as well to try and qualify for those 4 spots. Going over to Throwdown, we had Darksided, Jam Gaming. Who else did we have? We had Legacy Esports and Love Decks most likely to qualify, and then everyone else kind of fighting for those final 2 spots with it was Tainted Minds and Chiefs that were already qualified for those 2 spots in Throwdown. And then moving on, we saw that Complexity signed the X Method roster. Hopefully it's good for this team. They have a lot of resources to work with, and that'll help them kind of get out of the slump they've had in the offseason. And then we have the upcoming Gfinity Elite Series, the rosters, the teams, the groups. It's going to be a lot of great action, a lot of great stuff going on this weekend. You guys definitely want to tune in. We'll probably be posting tons of articles on the Octane GG website. But we want to thank you all for tuning in tonight for Full Throttle, the Octane talk show. Joining myself, Vaudable, alongside Slock, Dexy, and B Shadow, and Paz, who couldn't be with us, unfortunately. We thank you for tuning in.
Notes.
Yeah, thank you for the notes. I hope you're back here soon, because we don't know as much as you do about OC, and we'll probably see him next week and see all you then as well.